is people who've kind of faced similar challenges and who relate to the story, they come up and talk to me afterwards. There was one mom who lost a son exactly the same way, as what was described in the movie. And she said it's so realistic. And that to me was, the best compliment I could have gotten.
I'm sure about that. Now let's talk a little bit about the characters of the movie. The main characters of the movie depict a successful Indian immigrant family that are dealing with a family tragedy. Now, what inspired you to tell the story from their perspective? Like, is there an ethnic angle to the whole story?
I mean, it deals with Indian immigrants, and I think the reason I wanted to focus on immigrants is I feel like the problems are accentuated for immigrants because I think the pressure on children by their parents is really higher amongst immigrants than it is amongst mainstream America. First of all, they've given up a lot of family ties to come here. They're usually the best and the brightest, as I said, and they have all these hopes and dreams for their children, things that they couldn't have or they couldn't do. So the pressure on the kids is a lot more, to live out their parents' dreams, And so I feel like I wanted to focus on that, on the immigrant story. Secondly, it's a world I understand. My parents are immigrants, and I'm an Indian American, so it's a world I know and understand. It's easier for me to write about it. And and also I feel there aren't enough movies made about immigrants that are not caricatures, There are a lot of movies that are, where Indian Americans, or especially men, are comedic or typecast into, comedic kind of buffoon-like roles, But to have a serious, family drama about Indian Americans is there are a few, but there aren't that many.
Right. And I'm sure when you see a familiar family dealing with something, you can actually relate to it more nicely, right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So like, what's the message about behavioral health that you want to convey to all the audience through the movie?
That's a great question. I actually did a lot of research on depression before I started, writing, and I tried to. Some of the critics have said, "Oh, the story is too simple," but it's actually not, because a lot of depression, the signs are very subtle. Like, for example, if a child becomes introverted to the point where they stop seeing their friends and they stop talking to you, and that's a sign. But that could happen just because the child has a lot of homework. It's easy to miss these signs. So I wanted to make the signs of depression. I wanted to show them in a film, because I think people will recognize them when they see them, in other ways. So one is, the social awkwardness, introversion, lack of communication, problems with eating, problems with sleeping. So all of these are subtly shown in the movie. I mean, it's said in words or so on.
Right.
The reason I focused on the families, I didn't want this to be a trigger. One of the problems with this topic is if you show how the person has committed suicide, or make it or glamorize it in some ways, it becomes a trigger. So there's a phenomenon called contagion, where once there's one suicide, there's a succession, so cluster suicide, which is what happened in Palo Alto. And I certainly did not want this movie to be a trigger. So what I did was, one of the deterrents is if you focus on the pain that suicide causes. The people who are actually thinking about this, they think either nobody cares or the world would be better off without them.
Right.
And when they actually see the amount of pain they cause with this act, it's a deterrent. And that's why I focused on the family, because I felt, this would be a real way of showing. And then I do flashbacks, because the person who has passed, that's how I show the person, through memories of the living.
Wow, that is a beautiful message indeed. And I really like the way you have thought about from the perspective of the person who committed suicide, and also from the perspective of the parents, like how they deal with the grief. And and at the same time making sure that this does not act as a trigger for people to follow, right? So that's a beautiful way of doing it. So now, like on a much lighter note, Saila, in future, do we see a Bollywood debut from you, or this? Please talk about your future projects that you are thinking of right now.
I have several different ideas. One is another idea which kind of bridges the two countries, India and America. But then I have another idea which is completely takes place in America and is not ethnic in any way. So I have several different ideas, and I'm thinking about which one I want to pursue. I mean, it's a huge endeavor. I mean, this movie has really taken 4 years of my life. I mean, I've put heart and soul 200% into this movie for so long. So I really, the next thing I take on, I want it to have a lot of meaning for me, enough that I would want to devote that much time to it.
Hey YouTube fans, I'm Sneha. Thanks so much for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe to watch the latest interviews, ITV's coverage of feature events and digital exclusives. And don't forget that you can get ITV on Time Warner Cablevision and RCN.